Hey, everybody. This week we're going to be talking about leadership in light of the human condition. So, this will assume some things here. It'll come from a theological understanding that's tied into your concept of sin and the sin nature. But I'll leave a lot of that for your theology course or how you work out your theology of leadership. But I just need to confess to you that there is a theological bent to this conversation. One of the chapters you're reading out of the leadership book is the one on the interplay between light and shadow. And this week, I want you to think in your theology of ministry or your theology of leadership paper, how does this interplay of light and shadow relate to you, those you're leading, in your organization as a whole? Because although we're primarily concerned about your self-leadership, initially at least, how you lead others and how you lead organizations, I think it's important to discuss the human condition and how that affects things. I was talking to a high-capacity leader the other day who told me that he, just a gift that God had given him was charisma. And this charisma could be light, in that it could be a sign of God's Spirit animating His Spirit, and it's catalytic, it's exciting, it inspires people. But he said there's a shadow side to it that, in his experience, a lot of people wanted to follow him or to serve alongside him, and oftentimes because they had something missing in their life. And they thought he would be the hero or the problem solver for their life. And so he learned after some heartache that he had to develop ways to minimize the shadow side of this gift. And so our life is always this light and shadow, because there's always the potential and the propensity for evil to emerge in whatever form or fashion it would do so to keep us from living God's abundant life. So this week I want you to wrestle with the human condition. I want you to wrestle with what happens when you make a mistake. How flawed can you be as a leader? How flawed can others be? And specifically, how do you do whatever you can to become aware of the things that others may see that you don't? So let me tell you a couple stories, give you a couple resources. I'm going to read from on the side of the screen, so I'll be thinking about you even though I'm not looking at you. It's a story from a book called Creativity Incorporated, written by the guy who's at Pixar, the movie company that made Toy Story movies. And he's writing, the premise of the book is, how do you develop and maintain environments of creativity? But this chapter, the opening of this chapter called The Hidden, caught me the other day. And he writes this. In ancient Greek mythology, Apollo, god of poetry and prophecy, falls in love with the beautiful Cassandra, daughter of the king and queen of Troy. He woos her by giving her a rare and treasured gift, the ability to see the future, and in response, she agrees to be his consort. But when she later betrays him and breaks that vow, a furious Apollo curses her with a kiss, breathing words into her mouth that forever take away her powers of persuasion. From that day forward, she is doomed to scream into the wind. No one will believe the truths she speaks, and everyone judges her to be insane. Though Cassandra foresees the coming destruction of Troy, she warns that a Greek army will sneak into the city into a huge wooden horse. She is unable to prevent the tragedy because no one heeds her warning. The author says, the story of Cassandra is traditionally taken as a parable about what happens when valid warnings are ignored. But for me, it raises different issues. Why, I always wonder, do we think of Cassandra as the one who's cursed? The real curse, it seems to me, afflicts everyone else, all of those who are unable to perceive the truth she speaks. He says, I spend a lot of time thinking about the limits of perception. In the management context particularly, it behooves us to ask ourselves constantly, and listen to these questions. How much are we able to see? How much is obscured from my view? Is there a Cassandra out there we are failing to listen to? In other words, despite our best intentions, are we cursed too? Then he goes on to say that many of the leaders around him and the culture around him are unable to maintain a sustainable culture. And he says they had management and operational skills. They had grand ambitions. They didn't think they were making bad decisions, nor did they think they were being arrogant. Yet delusion set in. And as bright as these leaders were, they missed something essential to their continued success. The implication, for me, was that we would inevitably be subject to those same delusions at Pixar unless we came to terms with our own limited ability to see. We had to address what I've come to call the hidden. The hidden. I love it because he talks about how it doesn't matter how good someone is as a leader or a manager, or how crafty their vision is, and how charismatic they may be. We are all prone, he says, to the limits of perception. What do we see? What don't we see? When you rise up in position sometimes in an organization, you stop receiving information from those who are serving at a role that they would describe as under you, because you're now in a position of power. But it doesn't mean that the things you heard when you were equals are not being talked about still. You just aren't privy to them anymore. So these limitations of what is true, what is not true, we understand organizationally. But what about personally? You have a document listed there in the course called the Johari Window. If you will, open that. I want to talk through that a little bit with you as a means by which we can be better leaders and be aware not only of ours but of others and our organization's limits of perception. So if you look at that document, it's like a quadrant, four little boxes there. You'll see at the top it talks about known to self, known to others, unknown to others. So in the top left, you have this category called open. In the open area, it says are those part of our conscious self, our attitudes, behavior, motivations, values, way of life, of which we are aware and which is known to others. We move within this area with freedom. We are open books. So just down from that are things that are known to self but unknown to others for whatever reason. It cannot be known to others unless you disclose it. I think it's okay to have some things in this category because I think of Jesus, don't cast pearls before swine, not that I call anyone else a swine, but there's wisdom in knowing what to share, when, and with whom. But this is the hidden quadrant. And then top right is the blind quadrant. And these are things about ourselves which we do not know, but that others can see more clearly. Or things we imagine to be true of ourselves, but for a variety of reasons, others do not see at all. This is what I pray happens during your collaborative inquiry. That you would posture yourself to receive words from the rest of your group that are honest and are based on their perceptions of you, not because anyone wants to do anyone else harm, but because I believe there could be some things that are known to others that are unknown to you. I think of David when he had messed up. It was a prophet who came in and revealed what then God confirmed in David's spirit. So collaborative inquiry is a means by which the blinders can come off. But then the lower right quadrant here is the unknown. It says we are more rich and complex than that which we and others know, but from time to time something happens. Is felt, read, heard, dreamed, something from our unconscious is revealed. then we know what we have not known before. This is the process of awakening. I think sometimes we push things into this category, or we're afraid of this. But any organization will tell you that there are some unknown things that, if not mined well, can seek to undo the organization. So the Johari window reveals that there may be some things about you, about your leadership, about the people in your church. On that note, have you ever asked people in the community what they think about your church? Your church may be operating out of a blindness. They may think something about themselves that isn't the actual perception. Or there may be some things that are just completely, utterly hidden. To awaken us to this, he says in this creativity book, he sees it as his job in the organization to dive into the unknown and the blind areas so that they will not, to minimize the liability of those areas before they become issues. I think in the Christian faith, this is one of the many reasons why I believe so deeply in something like a rule of life. Because, if you remember, a rule of life is an intentional plan to keep God at the center of all that we do. It is a way to posture ourselves, if you will, to see what has blinded us before, or to make known what has been unknown. It's a way to come to the well and sit before Jesus and say, reveal what is true. So these spiritual disciplines are ways to help us become aware of the human condition, the parts of us that, if revealed without understanding, could be liabilities to our leadership and our organization. To have them come out in the presence of a community or in the presence of a Savior who is going to help you wrestle through that. So the rule of life is a critical thing to help you become aware of these things that are unknown to you. Secondly, I think something that I pray for you and I hope for you is that you would find a regular pattern of theological reflection. You will be done, believe it or not, with weekly reflection reports someday. But when you're done with that, I pray that you would find a pattern of theological reflection still, where you can answer deep questions, like some that emerged from the book reading this week for me are like, what's your real motivation when you want to bring about change? Sit with that question before you change something in your organization. What's the motivation behind it? And just let God purify that, because some of your stuff may be creeping in, or you may have a voice in the congregation that you want to please, and so that's the voice telling you what to do unconsciously. Sit with questions like that in a theological reflection to say, why am I doing what I'm doing? Or why did I do what I do? And what does that reveal about God? Another way that this happens is through relationships. And I've already mentioned that with collaborative inquiry. But when you're done with formation, who are the people around you that will tell you the truth? Who are the people that will help you see what has not been seen before? Who are the Nathans? Who are the Barnabas people that will come alongside you and encourage you so that you can be in an environment where you're safe to explore the deepest places? So, rule of life, theological reflection, and relationships. These are critical pieces to help you understand those things that are hidden from you, which could lead to sin, it could lead to dysfunction in ways that are indicative of the typical route of the human condition, but not for those who claim to be in Christ Jesus. So I have one question for you this week. It does have 3 parts, so apologize. No, not really. The question is, what are the steps you need to take to bring more light into, and then 3 areas. Let me repeat the question. What are the steps you need to take to bring more light into, number 1, your leadership in your life? So think about you. What are the things that God is inviting you to put alongside your leadership so that you become aware of the stuff that has been hidden? So the second area is for others. How do you help others in your church or in your organization pay attention to the things that are hidden? How can more light? What do you need to do to bring more light? And think of this, the third one is organizationally. So self, others, so think of key relationships or board members or deacons in your church. But third, organizationally. Do you have means by which those that aren't a part of the decision-making processes can speak into their perceptions of what's happening at the church? Again, you can choose what you do with that information, but could there be a Cassandra that needs to speak, but for one reason or another, which those are things you should explore in theological reflection, you haven't given them a chance to voice? How can you bring light into your leadership, others, and in your organization? Let me tell you a final story. You can only see what you can see, but it doesn't mean that other things aren't happening. I remember many times leading in churches where I just got into the motions and I started moving, started going forward, and I had no idea about a critical personality trait that was emerging until someone finally pointed it out. And actually, one of you, a student, pointed it out to me a couple of years ago as well. And I was, at the time, kind of taken back and I became defensive. But then I remembered, wait, someone else had told me that years before. And it's this, that when I'm leading discussions, sometimes I can minimize people or make them feel minimized when they don't give the response I'm looking for. And so it shuts down voices. And it's unintentional, but it comes from a place of control. I want to control the conversation. And it was achieving the exact opposite result of what I wanted in the conversation. That was a blind spot for me. But it was deeply rooted in my fear that if I really opened the floor to any kind of conversation and question, that chaos would ensue, that I would be vulnerable, that people would think I didn't have a good plan. And so I still have to process through, remember, this light and shadow, this interplay between them, that my conversation skills can be light, but they can also be shadows if they're coming out of my sinful nature, my human condition. So this week, think about your leadership, your propensities. How can you bring more light into your life? How can you help others around you allow God's light to shine even deeper? And then organizationally, how can you allow for more light to reveal what may be hidden? Enjoy the conversation this week.